So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and this is another episode of Day to Day Around the House. In this video, I'm going to be replacing the rollers and the track on an Arcadia door at my father-in-law's house. Now, this was getting very hard for them to open and close, and all we ended up doing was replacing the rollers in the Arcadia door itself and putting a new track in place. Now, all this ended up costing right around $55 at Home Depot. I also did some search on Amazon and found most of these rollers and stuff is available on there as well. Might be a little cheaper. However, we needed to get it done that day, and that's where we ended up going. So I'm going to be showing you two different types of Arcadia doors. One that just pops off the track from the inside of the house, and then one that pops off from the outside of the house, which takes a little bit more work, which is the one we're going to be focusing on for the most part in this video. And obviously there's going to be a little bit different style roller depending on the brand of the Arcadia door, but the overall concept should be very similar, so this video should help you out, even if your Arcadia door doesn't look identical to the one I'm doing in this video. So the first place we tried looking for the rollers and the track was at Lowe's because it was closer, but they only had one type of roller for an Arcadia door and they did not have the track cover. We talked to one of the associates there and told him we were going to run over to Home Depot. He said he had worked at Home Depot for 12 years and they're not going to have it either. We didn't listen to him and we went there. Home Depot had a wide variety of the rollers and they also had the track cover as well. Now, I did tell a little story there, but I have a point to it. If you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or any hardware store and these guys don't really sound like they know what they're talking about, most likely they don't. Now, I'm not saying all of them are like that. But if you have any doubts whatsoever, it's happened to me several times, make sure you double check yourself. Don't always just go what off the associate at the store tells you. So obviously there is a couple things that can cause an Arcadia door to be hard to open or close, besides the rollers and the track, even though those are going to be your most common causes. So if your door is hard to open and close the entire way, then that's going to lead most likely to a roller or a worn out track. However, if there's just one spot that is getting hard to open at, it might be something as simple as the lower rail got bent as you were taking something in or out the door. So make sure you do check that before going through the hassle of replacing these rollers. If it looks like that might be a problem on your lower frame rail, you can just use a block of wood and a mallet to try and tap it back and take that bend out of the lower rail. So if you're lucky, then the Arcadia door will pop out of the track on the inside of the house because then there's a lot less disassembly involved to get it out. If you're trying to figure out which way the sliding door comes out of the frame, just look at the lower rail. If one is higher than the other, it is going to come off on the side that is lower. If they're equal, like the one at my house, then you can pull it right off on the inside of the house without any other disassembly. So the door at my father-in-law's house did have the offset lower frame rails, so I had to remove the door from the outside of the house, and in order to do that, I had to remove the patio screen and the stationary part of the Arcadia door in order to remove it. On this style of patio screen door, all you have to do is lift it up in the upper track and then pull the bottom track out in order to remove it. Now, this one was being a little tricky and I did have to pry the rollers a little bit with a screwdriver. There is also an adjustment screw that if you turn it counterclockwise, that should make those rollers go down a little bit and make it easier to remove. This little short clip is showing you where those adjustment screws are, and you can do those when it's still in the track in the door. We also had to remove the stationary part of the door. There was 3 screws that went through the door frame to that stationary piece of glass. Once removing those 3 screws, then we were able to do the same thing as the patio door screen, lift that stationary piece of glass up into the upper part of the track, then pull the bottom part of the door out of the track and remove it. Once removing the stationary part of the door, then you are able to do the same thing as you did with that piece to the sliding part of the door. You should be able to lift it up in the track, pull the bottom part of the door out of the track, and remove it. If it doesn't seem like the door is coming out of the track, there is adjustable rollers on the bottom part of the door as well, and you will turn those screws counterclockwise in order to raise the rollers up in the door to give you more clearance to remove it. So the one bottom roller was stripped out and I could not turn it counterclockwise because it just wasn't going, and I did have to use a flathead screwdriver, kind of like a pry bar, to help lift the door off of the bottom track in order to get it out. So right here is the adjustment for those bottom rollers, so if you need to, you can adjust them. And right here, it shows you that going clockwise with the screw raises the roller, and counterclockwise is going to lower the roller, which is what you might need to do in order to remove the door from the rail. Once we were able to get the door removed, I did lay it down on its side to enable me to get to the bottom rollers so we could take them out to match them up. On this door, there was one Phillips screw holding each one of the rollers in place, and all I had to do was remove that screw, and then the roller pulled right out of the bottom of the door. Once we removed that roller, I was able to take that to Home Depot, get them matched up. When matching these up, make sure you check every aspect of these rollers for minute differences, including the style of the bracket, little tabs that are on it. Just make sure it's an identical match. If you decide to order it off of Amazon, Amazon's pages should have the measurements, and I would double check those sizes with your old one before ordering it, and make sure there is free returns in case something's not quite right. So right here's one of the rollers that we pulled out of the door. You can see all that play in the roller. That's meaning the bearing in there is worn out, and that's what was causing the door to be hard to open and close. Another cause of a door being hard to open and close is the bottom track that the rollers ride on being worn out. This one had some pretty bad flat spots. If it gets bad enough, the actual roller itself is going to ride on the flat part of the bottom rail instead of up on the track, which could also make it hard to open and close. And that was the case with the track in this door. So right here we bought a patio track cover that just snaps over the top of the pre-existing track and basically gives it a new track to ride on. If you're planning on doing this, make sure you measure the width of your door. The one we purchased was able to cover an 8-foot door. We just had to cut it to length. If it appears as if there was already one of the track covers on your door and it's worn out, you should be able to leverage it up with a heavy-duty flathead screwdriver on both sides in order to pop the old one off so you can install the new one. Now I'm just showing you this for a reference because this track cover is still in good shape on my Arcadia door. It might be necessary to hold the actual lower frame rail down as you try and pry the track cover up off of it so it does not lift up while you're trying to get it off. The track cover we got came in two 4-foot sections, so I snapped the first one into place, starting at the one side of the door, made sure it was lined up, and then I used a rubber mallet with a piece of wood to lightly tap it down over the pre-existing track. Then I took the second 4-foot section, put it over the top on the other side of the door, and marked it with my finger. Because I was not at my house, I did not have a hacksaw in order to cut it, so I used a pair of dikes and pinched it at the mark I made, and then leveraged the track side to side until it basically snapped off. Then I used a flathead screwdriver to bend it back to its original shape on the end that I had pinched. Then laid it down on the rest of the original track and once again tapped it in using that piece of wood and a mallet. Just for reference purposes only for this video, I decided to try and cut that track with a hacksaw. And I actually feel that pinching it with the dikes and leveraging it actually worked out a lot better than trying to cut this with that hacksaw. So now I'm going to install the new rollers in the bottom of the Arcadia door. So here's a view of what the screw threads into in the Arcadia door, and the screw goes through this tab on the roller. So you just put that tab right in front of where the screw goes in and tighten the screw down. So right here I'm just putting the roller back in the one I already took out to get it matched up. So I just pushed the new roller in place and set that tab up on the lower door frame. Then using a pair of needle nosed, I help hold that screw until I could get it started, because the screw for this roller actually tightened down against the inner door frame instead of the outer. Once getting the first one replaced, we went ahead and flipped the door over to make it easier to do the second one. Right here I'm removing that screw and pulling the second roller out of the door. You'll notice that after I removed the screw, how tight the old roller was in the door frame, and as I put the new one in, you'll notice how loose it is. That was the one minor difference between the ones that I got from Home Depot and the old ones, is they weren't quite as wide. So they did flop around in that lower frame assembly. But once the door is in its track, it can't really go anywhere, and the screw is going through that tab to hold it. So I went ahead and ran with it just because there was no other option for me as far as getting rollers that day, and I needed to install this door. But that shows how accurate you need to be when matching these things up. Everything else was identical, except for the other one was a little wider than the one I ended up getting. The only other difference from side to side was this screw actually anchored and held against the outer door frame versus the other side, which held against the inner door frame. And if the rollers in your door look a little different than the ones I just replaced in this one, Just do one at a time so you can use the other side for a reference, and there should only be 1 or 2 screws that hold them in no matter what style of door you have. At this point, if you did install new rollers, they're probably already adjusted all the way down. If you decided to reuse the rollers that were already in the door because they were still in good shape, and you had a hard time getting your Arcadia door out of the door frame, just turn your adjustment screws counterclockwise to lower the rollers to make it easier to get up in place, and then tighten them clockwise to adjust them back up once it is in the door frame. After making sure both rollers were down as far as they would go, we flipped the door back over so we could reinstall it. To install the sliding door, you're going to leave it at a little bit of an angle and slide it into the upper track, and then the lower part of the door should raise up over the lower track in order to install it. I used my foot to help lift the lower part of the door up into the track. Now, because these rollers were a little skinnier, they were hanging down, and I did end up having to use a flathead screwdriver to help lift those rollers so they would go up over the bottom frame rail. Once the door is properly in place, you'll notice since you adjusted those rollers down that the lower part of the door is almost rubbing the lower track. So then you take that Phillips screwdriver and go clockwise with the adjustment screw to raise the roller and lift that door up a little bit. If you're struggling with making this adjustment, it might help to have somebody lift up the part of the door that you're trying to adjust to make it so there's not as much resistance on it. I actually lifted it up and set it on the lower track, made the adjustment, and then set it back down to see where I was at. Try and keep the adjustments as equal as possible on both rollers. That way you keep the door nice and square and not leaning. Basically what you're trying to accomplish with this adjustment is making sure that the weight of the door is sitting on the roller on the track and not on the lower part of the door in the lower frame rail. Once I made the adjustments and made sure that the door was sliding good, then it was time to reinstall the stationary part of the door. Once again, you just slide it up at an angle into the upper track and then lift the bottom into the lower track. Then slid it all the way over to the one side of the door frame so I could reinstall the 3 screws that hold that part of the door in position. Once I installed all 3 of the screws, then I checked the sliding door again to make sure it was moving nice and freely and that it wasn't rubbing in any way, shape, or form on the stationary part of the door. Now, if you ended up struggling getting the screen door out of the track, there is adjustments for the roller just like on the Arcadia door, and they work the exact same way. Clockwise in order to raise the rollers and counterclockwise to lower them. So if you did struggle, go counterclockwise to lower them a little bit. You can always raise them back up after you get them in the track. The screen installs just like the doors up into the upper track, then leverage the bottom part of the screen up over the rail and into the track for the screen. And sometimes, just like the Arcadia door, a flathead screwdriver to help lift those rollers up over into the track might be useful. And then just like adjusting the rollers on the Arcadia door, you can do the same thing with the screen. This is especially helpful if you have your screen popping off the track often and having to put it back on. Sometimes adjusting those rollers up a little bit to keep it a little tighter between the upper and lower frame rails will prevent that from happening. And that's about all there is to it, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible so I don't waste your time. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.